U.S. shutdown chaos is Washington about to break the economy. The political standoff has turned into a full-blown crisis, impacting millions of Americans and threatening the fabric of our economy. With no end in sight, what does this mean for your future? Stay tuned as we dig into the chaos and what's really at stake for the nation. Today, we're breaking down the urgent questions. How did we get here? What's next? And could this shutdown push the U.S. into economic turmoil? Let's get into it. A crisis of basic necessities. At the core of this crisis are the most vulnerable Americans, those who rely heavily on federal aid to survive. The suspension of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, commonly known as food stamps, has left approximately 42 million people in limbo. For many low-income families, the loss of these benefits is nothing short of catastrophic. Families living paycheck to paycheck, individuals with disabilities, and the elderly are now confronted with the terrifying prospect of not knowing where their next meal will come from. Legal battles and emergency measures have attempted to mitigate the damage. Federal judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island have ordered the Department of Agriculture to use emergency funds to make partial SNAP payments. However, these measures are temporary patches on a much larger wound. The uncertainty surrounding how much aid recipients will receive and when has fueled anxiety and hardship across the country, straining charitable and community resources. With federal assistance drying up, families are turning to food banks and charities that are already stretched thin. Food pantry operators report unprecedented demand, with some running out of supplies faster than they can restock. In the history of dairy care, this has not happened before, remarked a food pantry coordinator, highlighting the severity of the situation. Demand has surged by 48% over the past 2 years, a trend amplified by the pandemic's lingering effects. Legal and political battles. Amid the chaos, legal challenges have emerged. Democratic-led states have argued that the Trump administration could and should use emergency funds to alleviate the crisis. Critics accuse the administration of resisting such measures, prolonging the suffering of millions. The debate over whether funds designated for emergencies can be tapped into remains unresolved, underscoring the political gridlock that has paralyzed Washington. This deadlock is unprecedented in the history of the federal government's shutdowns. The current crisis has now surpassed 30 days, making it the second longest shutdown in U.S. history. The prolonged impasse raises serious questions about the government's ability to respond swiftly to crises, especially when lives are at stake. Impact on the economy and critical infrastructure. The shutdown's economic fallout extends beyond social welfare. Federal employees, including air traffic controllers, have been furloughed or working without pay for weeks. This has already led to staffing shortages at airports, with some controllers skipping work due to financial hardship. While officials insist that air travel remains safe, the risk of operational disruptions is rising. The transportation sector exemplifies how the shutdown jeopardizes critical infrastructure. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, warns that if staffing shortages worsen, flights could face delays or cancellations, further disrupting commerce and travel. An airport shutdown would be a severe blow to the economy, especially as tourism and business travel are vital engines of growth. Uncertain economic trajectory. Historically, government shutdowns have been temporary inconveniences, often lasting a few days or weeks. However, the current impasse threatens to deepen economic wounds. If the shutdown persists, especially affecting sectors like air travel, federal payments, and public services, the costs could become lasting. Lack of urgency and political apathy. Perhaps most troubling is the apparent lack of urgency from Washington's leadership. President Donald Trump, who has traveled abroad during the shutdown, appears disengaged from the crisis. Critics argue that the administration's focus on other priorities, such as a lavish White House renovation, ignores the suffering of millions. A crisis waiting to escalate. As the shutdown drags on, the risks escalate. Without swift action, the nation risks a cascade of failures, further economic decline, increased homelessness, rising food insecurity, and a collapse of essential services. The longer the deadlock persists, the greater the chance that the ripple effects will spiral into a full-blown national crisis. In a nation that prides itself on resilience, the current chaos reveals a stark reality. When political partisanship takes precedence over the needs of the people, everyone suffers. The question remains, how long can Washington afford to ignore the mounting human and economic toll before it finally acts? The answer could determine the future stability of the United States itself.